Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are looking at something, well, absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's just dive right into it. We're going to deconstruct one of the most famous quotes in human history. It's a phrase you've likely heard 100 times, regardless of your background or what you believe. But here's the catch. It is also one of the most deeply misunderstood phrases out there. Today, we're going to look really closely at the source material to uncover what this ancient text actually means, how it's used today, and how a proper understanding might literally change how we view morality, compassion, and honestly, just our day-to-day human relationships. And there it is, just 7 little words. Judge not, that you be not judged. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 1. Now, culturally speaking, this quote is just absolutely ubiquitous. You see it popping up on social media, you hear it in everyday conversations, and it's frequently deployed as this kind of absolute shield against any form of correction, accountability, or even simple disagreement. In our modern usage, this single sentence is so often treated as if Jesus just abolished moral discernment entirely. But what if we've gotten it completely wrong? Think about what happens when you strip just 7 words entirely from their linguistic, historical, and cultural context. You get a massive misunderstanding of what was actually being taught. To really grasp this, we have to zoom out. When you read it in context, this passage doesn't teach a blanket ban on judgment. It forbids a very specific kind. And that distinction, it changes absolutely everything. Now, before we get into what the text actually means, we kind of need to dismantle the modern myths surrounding this verse. The source material highlights how this verse is so commonly misapplied in today's culture. In fact, it breaks it down into 3 distinct modern misuses. Let's take a quick look at how this ancient text has been totally reshaped by modern assumptions. Okay, so here are the 3 primary misuses. First, you can never tell someone they are wrong. If you confront obvious corruption or manipulation, the immediate response is, hey, judge not. It becomes this conversation-ending weapon. Second is the assumption that correction is inherently sinful. This basically assumes no one has the moral standing to ever correct anyone else. And third, the idea that all lifestyles, beliefs, and behaviors must be affirmed. In modern culture, simple disagreement is frequently equated with hate, and having discernment is suddenly labeled as judgmentalism. We're really being pushed toward radical tolerance and moral relativism, where any claim to truth is seen as intolerance. But here's the thing, this weaponized use of judge not collapses almost immediately when you contrast it against the broader context of the exact same chapter. Just a few verses later, Jesus says, do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. He also says, beware of false prophets. You will know them by their fruits. Now really think about that for a second. How on earth can you beware of false prophets or identify them by their fruits without evaluating their behavior, their character, and their doctrine? You can't. The text itself absolutely demands moral evaluation and character discernment. Jesus is clearly not banning all discernment here. To understand the true intent, we need to shift gears for a minute and look at the original language. The New Testament was written in Greek, and translating concepts across different languages and millennia requires us to look pretty closely at the root words used by the original authors. Take a look at the Greek verb translated as judge. It's krino. This word has an incredibly wide range of meanings. It can mean to distinguish, evaluate, decide, assess, condemn, or pronounce judgment. The actual meaning depends entirely on the context. So the root word krino doesn't automatically mean never evaluate anything. In fact, in plenty of places in the New Testament, forms of krino are used in a positive way. It's the context that determines whether the judgment being described is a really positive act of discernment or a super negative act of condemnation. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. In the Gospel of John, Jesus actually explicitly commands it. He says, judge with righteous judgment. This proves the issue isn't whether we judge at all, but how we judge. Scripture is constantly drawing a line between righteous discernment on one side and hypocritical condemnation on the other. Let's see how this builds in the immediate paragraph right after that famous quote. To explain his point, Jesus uses an analogy, and it is this incredibly vivid, intentionally exaggerated, almost absurd piece of imagery that his original audience would have visualized instantly. Jesus asks why you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank or massive log in your own eye. I mean, just look at the comedic absurdity of this. Imagine someone walking around with a giant wooden beam sticking straight out of their face, trying to perform delicate optical surgery to remove a tiny little piece of dust from someone else's eye. The hypocrite magnifies everyone else's tiny flaws while completely ignoring their own massive ones. They apply super strict standards outwardly, but incredibly lenient standards inwardly. The danger Jesus is warning about here isn't just getting your facts wrong. It is a profoundly distorted self-perception. So the crucial point is this. Notice what Jesus does not say. He never says to just ignore the speck. Instead, he gives a very specific order of operations. First, remove your own plank. Second, gain moral clarity. And then you can actually see clearly enough to help your brother. It completely transforms correction. It takes it from a place of arrogant superiority and turns it into an act of humble service. Which brings us to a major biblical principle that really threads throughout the entire text, from the Old Testament all the way through the New. There is a stark, unavoidable difference between the right and wrong ways to exercise moral vision. The text strictly condemns prideful condemnation, but it actually commands humble discernment. When we compare these two sides, the source text clearly forbids hypocritical, self-righteous condemnation, playing the ultimate judge over someone's soul. But on the flip side, it absolutely commands righteous discernment. Prophets and apostles in the text are constantly confronting corruption. You have the prophet Nathan confronting King David. You have the apostle Paul publicly rebuking Peter. We are totally called to discern, but we have to do so without any pride or malice. Ultimately, the difference really comes down to the posture of the heart. Condemnation says, you are beneath me. It seeks destruction. It seeks punishment. Restoration, on the other hand, says, I want your healing. It's seeking redemption. Biblical correction is supposed to look like a physician carefully treating wounds to save a life, rather than an executioner just swinging an axe. When judgment is harsh and hypocritical, it actually blinds the judge. It makes them super skilled at spotting others' flaws, while totally ignoring their own inner corruption. According to the source material, true biblical Christianity firmly rejects two extreme errors. Error one is hyperjudgmentalism, being harsh, proud, hypocritical, and entirely loveless. But error two is moral relativism, refusing discernment, refusing to even acknowledge truth, and just affirming everything indiscriminately. Finding the right path requires us to establish a necessary balance between merciless condemnation on one side and a total careless refusal to discern right from wrong on the other. If we zoom out to the macro biblical theme, we see exactly how the text resolves this tension. How do you hold strong, unyielding moral standards while simultaneously showing deep, genuine compassion? Well, the answer is that the text consistently joins justice with mercy. Truth without mercy is just cruelty. It's weaponized facts being used to destroy someone. But mercy without truth, that's moral chaos. It's an empty affirmation that just leaves people stuck in destructive patterns. The source material uses the story of the woman caught in adultery to perfectly show Jesus balancing both. He exposes the hypocrisy of the crowd, he absolutely does not approve the sin, yet he extends this incredible restorative grace. He says, go and sin no more. Truth and mercy meet together. Now, it's really important to validate something right here. Modern listeners have a very real and honestly very understandable fear of religious abuse, shame, and control. History is unfortunately packed full of harsh, hypocritical religion. But the solution to harsh religion isn't abandoning moral discernment entirely. Overcorrecting into moral relativism doesn't magically heal the wounds of the past. Instead, the text is calling us to practice discernment with these specific virtues: humility, deep self-examination, truth, mercy, accountability, and always a desire for restoration. So let's make this highly practical. When we really look at Matthew 7, it should prompt some pretty deep self-reflection. Ask yourself right now, am I harder on others than I am on myself? Do I secretly kind of enjoy condemning others? When I correct someone, is it coming from a place of genuine love and a desire for their healing? Or is it coming from a place of pride, just trying to prove that I'm morally superior? We have to examine our own hearts first. And here is a second, equally piercing question to challenge us on the flip side of the spectrum. Am I avoiding truth under the disguise of love? Sometimes we fall right into the trap of moral relativism simply because we want to avoid difficult conversations, social friction, or rejection. But if true love is acting like a physician treating a wound, ignoring the disease isn't love, it's actually just neglect. We have to ensure we aren't weaponizing truth without mercy, but also that we definitely aren't abandoning truth just to keep things comfortable. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The verse, "Judge not that you be not judged," does not mean never evaluate. It doesn't mean truth is intolerance. What it really means is that we must evaluate truthfully and mercifully, always starting with ourselves. The ultimate goal of this teaching isn't to blind our moral vision at all, it's to cleanse it. So the next time you hear someone use judge not to completely shut down a conversation, ask yourself, are they seeking true compassion, or are they just trying to hide their own plank? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.